Um, all right, it is now my pleasure to welcome up our keynote afternoon speaker, Christina Z. Hawley. She is the entrepreneur in residence in the Los Angeles office, or the office of LA Mayor Eric Garcetti. She's also a professor of innovation at USC. And if UCLA and USC can bridge the gap today, we can certainly bridge the gender gap in tech, right? Z is also a serial tech entrepreneur. She has spent a decade in academia starting innovation centers at MIT and USC. She is an MIT trained engineer, and she started the first TEDx event, which has inspired 12,000 other events around the world. And so it's really a pleasure to have her here today, and I want to welcome her to the stage. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I want to make sure that I have this. I don't even know how to use this clicker. Okay. So the human mind has an amazing ability to see things that don't exist. We're naturally wired to see patterns, which is why Rorschach tests were so popular many decades ago, and why we see the face on Mars. That's why this meme, drunk octopus, took off last year. He wants to fight. And we see crazy correlations in spurious data. Who actually believes that the deaths caused by X-ray contrast media are somehow correlated with bicyclists killed in collision with 2- or 3-wheeled motor vehicles? But the thing is, it's called apophenia, and imagination is just a really powerful thing. In fact, this grilled cheese was sold on eBay for $28,000 because somebody thought that it looked like the Virgin Mary. So you may be asking, well, why is this woman standing up in front of me talking about clouds and grilled cheese? Well, we've been talking a lot today about engaging women and technology. And what I want to do is, a lot of these ideas have come up, but I want to take a little bit of a step back and kind of apply some of the broader ideas in innovation, some thoughts that I have on imagination and how we might all harness imagination for greater impact. So what I'd like to do is I want us all to practice imagination right now. I want you all to close your eyes, and I'm going to tell you a story of something that happened just a week and a half ago. So close your eyes right now and just see how powerful it is when you're not actually seeing anything, but you're going to see this in your mind. So I think you might remember that a week and a half ago, it was raining, which is unusual here in LA. It was Saturday. And there was actually a man who was driving his son to soccer practice down here near downtown LA in Boyle Heights. And they're going along. Now just imagine what it was like. They're in the small car. Visibility is really poor. The rain is hitting the windshield. The windshield wipers are going back and forth. How many of you, raise your hand with your eyes closed still, how many of you can still imagine that? Okay, very visible, right? And they're going along and they're getting close to the school for soccer practice, and all of a sudden this oncoming car takes this abrupt left turn right in front of them, and they get into a head-on collision. And it's awful. There's the car is a jumbled mess. Just imagine how the ambulances rushed over there, and they're trying to get the father and the son out of the car with the jaws of life, and they're both bleeding profusely. It was terrible, and they ended up in the ambulance, rushed to USC County Hospital. So just imagine what it was like for this poor kid. He was 7 years old, and he's being wheeled into the hospital, and what it's like for that boy to be in this really stressful, and he doesn't know where his father is. The father's in another room, another gurney. So just imagine as the boy is being wheeled into the operating room, and the surgeon, all like in the get up and washed hands, looks down and says, "Oh my God, this is my son." Okay, you can open your eyes now. How many people know that story? Okay. The people who haven't heard that story, what did it feel like at the very end. Do you know how that's possible? Anybody want to hazard a guess? So I actually told my best friend yesterday, who's like this high-powered CEO of a tech company, this story, and she's like, I don't know. I think the surgeon must be the stepfather. The surgeon's the mother. Very good. Now, it's actually really amazing how this prototype in our minds of a surgeon being a man made it so difficult for us to understand and imagine, even this day and age. I have to admit, when I heard the story a long time ago, I made the same mistake. And it's called prototype theory. So it's something that, it represents a category of things that make us, it's a heuristic. It's based on real world, usually real world experience, for better or for worse, and it makes life a lot easier sometimes. But what happens is we usually judge things relative to that prototype that's in our brains. And I was lucky because I'm an only child. My parents encouraged me to do anything that I ever wanted to do. When I was a teenager, I was off scuba diving, and I was in a band, and I was doing all these boy things, and I went to MIT, and I never really thought, that I couldn't do something. I was really lucky. And even I didn't figure out the story. And it's really frustrating to me. It's sort of embarrassing. And it's why a lot of you in your groups are talking a lot about the importance of having female role models, having female mentors, and the importance of sending women to recruiting conferences. Why, when I curate an event, first I ask, do you have any suggestions for speakers? And invariably, they're always men. And then I say, okay, wait, now do you have any suggestions for women speakers? And all of a sudden, a whole new barrage of ideas come out once you start thinking of it with a different prototype in your mind. So let me share with you a more visual example. So which of the following circles looks the most red? Like, how many of you think the middle one, C, looks the most red? Would anyone want to argue that one of the other ones looks more red? Okay. Now I think that they're both pretty red, but I don't want you to focus on the top ones. Let's look at the bottom ones, D and E. Would any of you argue that one of those look red? Kind of. Well, certainly, I know that certainly that wouldn't have been my first choice, but if you look at it, we think of that as red hair and that as red wine, right? And it's all because it's relative to what we imagine the hair and the red to be like. And so we don't, at the same time, we don't bother calling tomatoes red. That was the middle circle, right? Because tomatoes are always red. And so what happens is, similarly, we expect a surgeon to look a certain way, we expect an engineer to look a certain way, and a tech entrepreneur a certain way, and a lot of times, when it doesn't, it creates this cognitive dissonance. And so that gets in the way. And so how we view the world reinforces the status quo, as we all know. And prototypes and preconceptions are figments of our imagination that really make it hard, not just in women and diversity, et cetera, but just in innovation in general. It makes it really hard for us to process new ideas. And what happens is imagination, we think of imagination a lot of times as a way of freeing your mind, but in fact it could be a tool for both good and also they could be used for innovation or against innovation. So let me tell you another story. This one's true, from the 19th century, of someone named Ignaz Semmelweis. And so he was a doctor. He was actually appointed a head resident at the Vienna General Hospital in 1846. And in the hospital, there were 2 maternity wards. And one of them, they were pretty much the same, except for whatever reason, one of them, 10% or more of the babies were dying every time. And it was just really frustrating. And then the other one, it's very little, and they couldn't figure out what the difference was. So he took it upon himself to solve this mystery. So he looked at it. He's like, they're dying of something called childbed fever, puerperal fever. So he looked at everything. He looked at what techniques were they using. They were absolutely the same. Was there overcrowding? In fact, there wasn't overcrowding in the first ward because the mothers would be begging on their knees. He remembers that they were begging to go into the other ward. The climate was exactly the same. They even looked at the religious practices, and the religious practices were the same. And there was only one difference. Does anybody know what that is? You guys know. It wasn't the exact, well, it was the doctors and midwives. One of them was doctors, and the other one was led by midwives. Now, the weird thing was, it was the one with the doctors that was doing terribly, and he couldn't figure it out. The first clue, though, came when his friend died of similar symptoms, and it was after he was cut by a scalpel from an autopsy. And all of a sudden he realized, oh my God, maybe there's some sort of a clue. And like some of you know, the doctors were not washing their hands after the autopsies going into the maternity ward. And for us, it's disgusting, right? But at this point, the whole idea of the germ theory of disease this was decades before Pasteur, and so he had a really hard time, convincing them. But at first, he didn't really say why. He just said, "Let's wash our hands. Let's see what happens." Immediately, within 1 month, the mortality rate dropped by 90%, and then kept dropping month after month. But when he finally started telling everyone why and what his theories were, they got offended, and the doctors just didn't receive acceptance, and so the doctors really took issue with that. And so some people say that Semmelweis didn't do a very good job of communicating these ideas, but it's even a problem today, actually, in hospitals. But at least now we understand what the cause is of disease. Now, we think we love novel ideas, but the truth is that not everybody loves an innovator. And, as some of you have said earlier today, one of the things we need to do is we need to change social norms. Well, we should be able to do that now, right? Because we understand science and we understand data, and we're not going to make the same mistakes, right? But there's a study that was just done recently with the National Institutes of Health. They were looking at the novelty. So they had an independent panel look at the novelty, not the quality, the novelty of the proposals and the scores that they were getting. And sure, up to a certain point, the more novel the proposal, the better the score. But then there's a certain point at which the score just drops off. We don't like new ideas at all. And it's just weird. We as humans, we just feel really uncomfortable. And it actually, if you look back 100 years, there was something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. It started with a research on rats, but it turns out we do the same thing. The more, there's a certain point at which there's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress, that actually makes us perform a lot better. This is the basis of what you might have heard as flow theory by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. There's a certain point at which we get peak performance, but then after that it drops off. And so what we need to do is we need to be pushing the boundaries, but just not too much, just a little bit. And there's something called the adjacent possible, where if we can start seeing something and visualizing it as being possible, but just a little bit different, then it makes it a lot easier to have a new idea adopted. So just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. Tradition is a dangerous thing, and it's definitely an uphill battle to change the status quo. So the question is, what can we learn as innovators, right? We're trying to make a huge impact here. We're trying to innovate the way things have been happening. So if you think about it, innovation, it's a process of transforming an idea into impact, right? It's not enough to just have the idea and have it in your brain, right? So there's 2 steps. Developing the good idea, right? So that's where things like, design thinking and empathy and creativity and being imaginative, all those things come into play. And that's like, the box. And of course, it's getting the idea adopted, right? So here's the box that everyone else is in, right? And aren't you clever? You're thinking outside the box, right? But that's not going to do a lot, right? Because no one else is going to really listen to you because you're way out there. So what we have to do is we need to make the box bigger, right? So creativity, I would say, creativity is about harnessing your imagination, right? But what we're talking about is innovation is about harnessing everyone else's imagination. And that's what we're trying to do here, is harnessing everyone else's imagination. Now, even professionals get it wrong. Just recently, Shasta Ventures just did an analysis of a bunch of billion-dollar companies that are in the market right now, and they looked back at what do these companies look like at Series A? And it turns out that, disruptive innovation seems so obvious in hindsight, but we really shouldn't be discouraged because Twitter Twitter was passed up by investors that were already invested in the company. And there's many of these companies that were passed up by a lot of really well-known venture capitalists. So things are not always are not obvious, right? And it also goes back to when my friend, a female friend, who's the CEO of a tech company, and myself, who I think of myself as pretty open-minded, we didn't get the story about the surgeon, right? So sometimes we need to check ourselves as well. It's not just about, it's the uninitiated. And here's a perfect example. 3 years ago, if you were traveling, you'd book a hotel, you'd get a taxi. Would you jump in a car with a stranger? No way. But that's exactly what you're doing now, right? Like, why would you do that? Now, clearly there's, Uber is cheaper. They're ubiquitous now. They have a great user experience. They have this great technology platform. But the truth is that they did a really great job of positioning. They positioned it as everyone's personal driver. And so a lot of what we're doing in harnessing imagination is to position the story in a way that really captures their imagination. And in general, these companies that were on that list were generally improving something that people were already wanting to do. It wasn't something actually really that crazy. People want to get around in an easier way. So there's a whole theory around technology adoption curves. And Geoffrey Moore wrote a book quite a while ago called Crossing the Chasm. He pointed out that during innovation adoption, there's a point at which technologies get stuck. So, there's the early adopters, there's the majority, the laggards. It's really hard sometimes to get the majority to accept the idea. And so his book was really primarily around marketing strategy. But the key takeaway is that you focus on one segment at a time. And they help convert the next. So you have a beachhead, and you demonstrate that it really works, and you show the vision and enable them to accept and have it adopted along the way. So when you talk about creating a vision, some of the folks that are really the best at it are artists, storytellers. In fact, Adora was talking about that today at lunch, about the importance of the narrative and the storytelling, and a lot of folks here were talking, in the breakouts, we're talking about the importance of telling the right story. And that's really true. And in Avatar, there's a lot of disbelief that we were suspending, right, when you're watching it. And you see this crazy world. And that's really what science fiction does really well, is creating these worlds. And when you start creating the maps, the backstory, the people, the language, and then the story comes out of that world. Now, if you think about it, the Avatar wasn't that different. So the aliens still looked like people in a way, right? And some of the creatures look like undersea creatures we already know. The plants, it looks kind of like a jungle. And so in some ways, they weren't, it was something that people could relate to in a way. And so this is the reason why it's so important to tell these stories of success, and ones that are really believable, ones that people, and I forgot who was just mentioned that the importance of not just having the huge role models that we never think we can attain, but people who, that sort of just people who are in the struggle right now, people that we can relate to. And if you think about it, it goes back to the campfire. Right? So our ancestors, we told stories to pass along lessons. They painted a vision of what could be. And so when I think about it, the lessons for me that I'm taking away from today, and also from thinking about innovation and my experience from innovation, is that we humans are wired to innovate, right? But at the same time, we're also wired to reject things that are too novel. And so it's really up to us to articulate a vision, focus on the people that will listen first, and then create these worlds and help, have inspire the imagination so that these ideas will take root. And we need to tell lots of stories, right? So with that, I want to wrap up with a final story about myself. And it's a true story. It wasn't that long ago. It was about 10 years ago. And I was still living in Boston at the time. And I had a flat tire on my way home. And it was 11 o'clock at night. It was late. I was really tired. And I pulled over. I'm like, I'm only about a mile from home. I could walk home, but this is silly. I know how to change a tire. It's been a long time, but I'll do it. So I'm like, all right, set up the triangle, pull out the jack, start jacking up the car, making sure I put it in the right place. And reminder to myself is don't pack a flashlight in your glove compartment, get a headlamp. It was like I had a flashlight in my mouth, and I'm sitting there, getting the lug nuts off. This guy pulls over, and he really means well. He's like, "Can I help? Can I do that for you?" I'm like, "No, I could do this." And I was like indignant, right? Like, I could do this. So he's like, "Okay, fine," and he leaves. And I'm like taking the lug nuts off, and then another person pulls over, and he says, can I do that for you?" I'm like, "No, I could do this." And I mean, in retrospect, I feel really bad. They really meant well, right? But I was like, I know how to fix a tire. Why does he think I don't know how to fix a tire? A few more, and it sounds like a joke, but like this third guy pulls over, and he says, "Oh, I just want to tell you, the triangle that you put up is awesome. I could see you from like a mile away. And, could I hold that flashlight for you?" And I'm like, "Yes, thank you." And so I think that the note here is that our role going forward as innovators is to really hold the light, right? And for us to not just be inspired ourselves to come up with great ideas, but to help inspire the imaginations of others so that they can see, this new world that we want to create for ourselves. And we want to inspire them to recognize the benefits that everyone will get if we have more diversity in technology and leadership going forward. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that, Z, and thank you all for being here. So I know I'm the only thing standing between you and wine, so I'll be as quick as possible. I know this was a really long day, but it was a really important one on a topic that very easily could have spanned an entire week or more to cover completely. And we all appreciate your willingness to have such collaborative discussions on ways that we can all have tangible impact in this area. So when John Villaseñor over there first suggested this conference, I didn't realize that there were so many very specific, tangible ways to have measurable impact in an industry that we all know really needs it. John was one of the key people who made this event possible, and I would be remiss not to mention a few others. So our sponsors, Google, Cisco, Lynda.com, TrueCar, Anderson School of Management, Managed Career Services, Acquia, OPT, UCLA IT Services, and UCLA Extension, as well as some of our incredibly influential official partners, including Originate, representatives of which have been volunteering extensively throughout the day, TechNet, which Linda Moore represented in track 1, and Personal Power Works. I also want to mention the event's planning team, who have been incredibly committed to making today happen. Colleen Callahan, the Luskin Center for Innovation's Deputy Director, Davida Johnson, Rhiannon Anderson, J.R. DeShazo, Stephanie Pikowitz, Chloe Reynolds, Alejandro Rioja, who created the website, Kiana Tahari, and especially Christian Zarate, who should be here somewhere, the Luskin Center's events coordinator, who went absolutely above and beyond in making the event we all enjoyed today. Also our advisory committee, including Jane Margolis, who named the event and spoke with you on the opening plenary. They've all been incredibly dedicated to this initiative and were absolutely instrumental in shaping the content of the day and the focus of the entire event. And of course, to all of you who came from all over the country to participate today, your commitment to directly taking part in the conference's objective is a really promising indication about the future of women in tech. And as a woman who's just entering the workforce, my generation owes everyone who's made this issue such a priority a huge debt of gratitude. We've all been inspired by the speakers and discourse here today, but this conference is only one step in the chain of events necessary to create the systemic change that will make the struggle for gender equality a thing of the past. As Sue mentioned, we all think every generation that this will be a thing of the past, and we're now empowered and in a position to make that true. The amazing speakers we've heard from are all leaders in this field, and they've been on the forefront of research, experiments, and implementation of programs and policies designed to increase diversity. The tech field epitomizes innovation and progress, as many of our speakers mentioned. And research shows that more diverse fields are more productive, profitable, and innovative than their homogeneous counterparts. The role and importance of countering unconscious bias is on the top of everyone's agenda. Tina Danowit, Brooke Hunter, and others suggested being cognizant of the different ways women interpret and are evaluated in the job application process. Jane Margolis, Victoria Oseni, and Susan Palm, amongst others, suggested looking at community partnerships and internships focused on women and diverse groups as pipelines to attracting more women into tech.
Lisa Kahn suggested looking at immigration reform, as immigrant women are more likely than natives to start businesses. And as Shelley Zalis highlighted, when you're the boss, you have the responsibility to change the rules. Michelle Anger suggested requiring at least one female candidate for every position. And you have all honed in on and prioritized the specific strategies that are most relevant to your lives and your workplaces. UCLA's Luskin Center for Innovation and Office of Information Technology will do our part to continue the conversation and better inform what works and what doesn't to advance women in tech. On Monday, we're going to start working on a report and possibly convening a task force that sums up and delves even further deeper into the strategies you all prioritize here today. We're going to incorporate your voices and perspectives to holistically evaluate what we know to be effective, some strategies that aren't yet demonstrated but hold potential, and assess those that have been shown to be ineffective. So, note takers in all of your breakout groups, please make sure to email me. That's what I'll be using, and include the names of everyone in your group, please, so I can properly credit them. So using this as one tool to outline solutions, we hope to better inform the important steps that people like you are taking to mitigate disparities in the tech sector. As speakers like Sue Gardner, Linda Moore, Lee Honeywell, and Monique Morrow have emphasized, consistency and commitment at all levels are necessary to truly impact the trajectory of women in tech. We are counting on you to continue moving this initiative forward with some of the strategies discussed here today. You are all now experts in ways to promote women in tech within your own companies and within your own spheres of influence, even if, as Adoro Doji pointed out, you may be reluctant to call yourself one. Thank you again, all of you, for playing such an important role in today's conversation and the objective of this conference. I hope you'll join us all for a reception in the adjacent foyer and continue these lively discussions throughout the reception and into the future. Enjoy, and thank you all again so much for being here.